So I've been asked to repeat the question, and the question I'll paraphrase is that I have heard that there's a lot of abuse in nursing homes, that people are being, the residents are being hit and so on, and that is this something we're going to have to face as we get older? And so the answer is, I cannot pretend that there is no abuse. It would be naive to say that we're in a perfect world and that there isn't abuse. There are two different scenarios that we try and distinguish. The first is there willful abuse? And the second is there accidental neglect or abuse because people don't know the specific needs of frail seniors? And both happen. Thankfully, both are relatively uncommon as far as we can tell from the best evidence we have. Where does that evidence come from? The evidence comes from court cases. The evidence comes from video surveillance. The evidence comes from random inspections. The evidence comes from people who hire private detectives to check in on their loved ones. The evidence comes from people who hire 24-hour caregivers privately to stay in the facilities and watch the nurses. None of these are perfect levels of evidence. They all have issues. But altogether, the suggestion is, and certainly from my 20 years in practice, yes, there are cases of abuse, but they are thankfully quite uncommon. But they're not zero. And so one of the ways we can try and minimize that is by, unfortunately, supplementing the care that is provided in those facilities and also being vigilant and advocating ourselves. I have the most difficult time when my patients have no one who can speak the language and is cognitively intact and can advocate for them. Because there are many frail older people who are abandoned and living in those facilities, and there's no one to check in on them. And so what happens there, we don't know. And that's the most difficult scenario. So we can find ways to minimize that and reduce that risk. But I want to come back to finish answering your question with these two examples. There are cases where people unintentionally hurt someone because they didn't know or weren't properly instructed in the techniques to be able to feed them or transfer them or be able to help them walk, and so sometimes that does happen. Because not everyone in these facilities has undergone the same level of education, and you only have a certain amount of registered nurses on site compared to nursing assistants, compared to personal support workers. There are ratios that the government dictates. And so the nurse, who is the most educated and often the most experienced, isn't there all the time and isn't able to see all the patients. And so there are some risks. But intentional abuse, such as the horrible case last year of the nurse who injected medications and killed a number of patients and was found guilty, those scenarios are extremely rare. But they're not zero. And the counter argument is that in assisted living and in people's private homes, there is still abuse and neglect. I deal with that actually more commonly in my practice than I do abuse and neglect in nursing homes. So we have to recognize there's no perfect home environment that is perfectly safe for people. And then the last thing I want to mention is sometimes these incidents are not because of staff, they're because of other patients. So one of my patients was in a nursing home that got burned down because another patient had dementia and set fire. Unintentionally, but they were able to put it out, but in some scenarios there have been patients who've died there. These things happen, unfortunately, and the government and the system legislation is there to try and prevent this, but it's not 100% foolproof. So it's a very good question, it's a very sensitive topic, and we can't pretend it doesn't happen, but it's still relatively uncommon.
Just want to understand, why does Islam emphasize that the wife comes first ahead of the parents?
Ideally, we are talking about a situation where the parents are still independent and probably even controlling you when you got married. So, the parents are not in need at that time. So your first primary responsibility towards your wife, and then the children come later on in life, and that's where the parents then, when they become old, their needs then become there. But it's not that, lesser important than the wife or the children, no. But it's just that's how it's basically emphasized, that your first, responsibility is to your wife in that way. But you see, we get all these different challenges, and this is not just wife, it's husband and wife on both sides, where sometimes they say, even if you go and visit the parents on the weekend for maybe 3 hours, helping them for groceries or whatever, they say, oh, you're taking my time. Or the children's time. Well, you have to have a balance there. There has to be an understanding. So if everybody is on the same page, alhamdulillah, everything is okay. Otherwise, we get into all these difficult situations.
I did go to 2 nursing homes. One of them deals with long-term care as well as assisted living. And that is very near us. It's on Elgin Mills. It is under Rivera. And they were willing to accommodate us like a wing or a space if we have certain amount of people or seniors who can be their clients. So we needed the feedback from today in order for the group of 12 to go and visit them. The other one is also an assisted living with a floor of long-term care, and that's the Italian-based, which is called Richview Manor. It's at the end of Dufferin and Bathurst. Dufferin and Elgin Mills. So we were waiting for all the feedback which we get today. They are also willing to give us a floor, and actually they have kitchens on every floor, and if we have enough people who we can give them as their clients, then they are willing to give us a floor where we can do our halal meals, where we can do our prayers, we can do all our cultural things. But we will need our own staff because we have to be aware of the gender, where they are willing to put the males and the females separate, and then if it's a couple, they have facility for a couple too. So unless and until we get a feedback from today, we will be able to go and visit them.
Specifically with Rama Foundation, the group or the other subgroups, we have contacted or been in touch with Rama Foundation as to the facilities they are providing. They have a different way of looking at the assisted living. They have dedicated floors in different nursing homes. Example would be at North York Hospital. There is a nursing home opposite there, which the Aga Khan Foundation gave close to about $150,000, and they have a dedicated floor, and they have 10 units. And then they have other 3 facilities also within Metro where they inform the Jamaat members to apply in those facilities where they will be able to be served the food and the prayer facilities. So in that respect, we have been looking at the other 2 homes in Richmond Hill to be able to get that kind of facilities available to us.
I just want to clarify, it's important to look at some of these other communities and models of care. Recognize that the majority of these models are involving assisted living spaces, either within a full assisted living facility or within a nursing home. Why that's important to recognize is that if you're applying to live in a nursing home and you want to create a Koja wing in a nursing home, for example, you can try and do that, but the government has a very specific application process to be able to get into a nursing home. There's eligibility criteria, and they will not create or allow dedicated beds. And so it's considerably harder to be able to cohort a group of Catholics or Muslims or whatever in a nursing home, because those beds are public beds, and that anybody who is eligible and applies for those nursing homes will put on a waiting list, and they go down the waiting list and pick people. So that even if you're in a multi-facility community of care, where, for example, there's an assisted living building right next to the nursing home and it's owned by the same community, the nursing home cannot preferentially take people from the assisted living. They must apply through the same standard process. And so it's much easier to have a wing in an assisted living environment than to create, for example, a Muslim wing in a nursing home. It's much, much harder. Not impossible, but much harder. And some of these other communities have managed to do that, but even on those floors where they have nursing home beds, there are people of other faiths and other cultures that are there because the government won't let them stop other people if they're higher up on the waiting list. So be aware that the two are not the same, and that we need to be very clear that we're talking about assisted living spaces versus nursing home cohorting.